Very good. Okay, good. So good morning, everyone. And so far the numbers, yeah, they continue to grow. I'm seeing them increase. We're at 114 at this second, 115 and so on. So today we want to spend a little bit of time looking at how we can use Alma for reviewing your data. And we're going to be doing this in a couple of different ways. One of them is by performing searches for a variety of things. And then a second part of things is to actually spend a little time in Alma Analytics with what I consider to be critical out-of-the-box analyses that you can be running with a test load of data so that you are that you're able to see, you know, does what has migrated thus far, does it make sense? You know, what are we seeing with that test load of information? So I'm going to go ahead and get logged in. And incidentally, for our purposes in this session and in the remaining group of sessions for CARLI, we will be using the Millikin University environment, and they have kindly agreed to allow us to be able to demonstrate Alma in an environment where there is a test load. So as you can see here at Millikin's environment, the very first thing I'm needing to do is to choose my current desk or department. In Voyager speak, this would be a happening location. And in Alma speak, we talk about it as being your currently at location. And you're able to see the options that are available for Millikin. There's an acquisitions or technical services department. There's the circulation desk. At an institution where there are multiple libraries, you likely will have multiple circulation desks to choose from. And again, depending on the size of the institution, it could be that there's more than one technical services unit. For our purposes today, I'm going to be choosing the circulation desk. And you know, the focus about the currently at location has everything to do with what you're able to do in the environment on the basis of that context. And so because I've chosen the circulation desk, under the fulfillment menu, we're able to see all of the things that relate to circulation activities. If I was at the acquisitions department, we would lose a large chunk of things in this particular menu. So that's just for whatever it's worth, the demand or the prompt to choose a currently at location is something that is set up in the Millikin environment. It may not necessarily be set up in your environment. It is an option. Whether or not you're always going to be challenged in that particular way. So as I indicated, I wanted to spend a little bit of time doing some searching to help you with understanding what kinds of things we are able to see in terms of looking at the Alma data. So to begin with, just identifying a few things that are on the screen here. So beginning with the menu that relates to searching. So in this case, the all titles at the top, and then we've got different kinds of indexes really that we can be choosing from. So all titles is the largest of the indexes, and you can see when I have selected it that there is then a sub index that I can use now to be focusing where exactly it is I'm searching. So you can see keywords and title are things that I have used frequently as I've been logged in, but that there are lots and lots of other options. This second menu is dynamic depending on what you choose. So if I choose physical titles, for example, we don't have the same list of things in the secondary index. Some of them, yes, but not all of the same things. And if I switch over to electronic collection, for example, again, a different set of things because now we've got different kinds of things to be looking at. going back to the all title search. Now, those of you who have participated in Alma workshops thus far will have heard me say this already, is that the all title search is focusing on bibliographic data. We're ignoring, when we perform this kind of search, we're ignoring the fact that the library might have a physical copy sitting on a shelf somewhere, or that it's an electronic resource. All we're saying, and for any of you who, at a reference desk and a patron comes up to you and says, what does the library have on such and such topic? I don't care what form it's in. This is the sort of thing that we are coming up with. So I'm going to perform a search for Abraham Lincoln. So I'm intentionally using keywords for this particular purpose. So the search is being performed. We're looking at the inventory held by Millikin. And one of the reasons that I know that we're looking at it is that we've landed on the Institution tab. And so the Institution tab says that at Millikin, there are 507 bibliographic records that have Abraham Lincoln in the record somewhere. And so we can see just here at the start that we've got, clearly the name Abraham Lincoln is being found in the title. If I make my way to page 26, and you can see that down there at the bottom, there's a way for me to be able to jump to the very last page in all of this. In this entire result set, that we find that we have entries where, of course, Abraham Lincoln is not being found in the title, but it's being found elsewhere in the bibliographic record. So if I was to then change my focus and go here from the all titles keywords to all titles title, that should change up the result set quite considerably. And as you can see, in fact, that it did. We now have 182 bibliographic records where Abraham Lincoln is found in the title. Okay, so just in looking at this kind of thing, then, we're able to see in looking at our results, and in fact, item number 1 in this list, that it is, and in fact, any of these items in the list that have this little hierarchical thing in here, I'm just going to increase the font size a little bit to make that clear, easier to see. And that is, this little hierarchical item means that this item is linked to a bibliographic record in the network. And the network, as you can see, there's a second tab here for the network. So institution versus network, and the network in this case includes all the data from all members who are part of the consortium, so 91 or 92, I'm not quite sure which number it is at this point. And then there's also the community, and we'll talk about the community in just a little bit. So that's the very first thing to be taking note of is this bibliographic record linked to others that are in the network? Second thing to take note of is item number 1 shows that this is a record suppressed from discovery. So suppressed from discovery, this is something similar to what you have available in Voyager, is that we can suppress a record at the bibliographic level. We can suppress a holdings record when that is appropriate, and so that we're able to say that the library has 3 copies of something, but copy 3 is suppressed from view. So it means, though, that we're still able to see it in Alma itself, and that we're able to work with it. So one of the things to be looking at in all of this is, does the number of suppressed records, does that make sense according to what we have in Voyager? Or did something get suppressed along the way, and unintentionally perhaps? I'm going to go back to the keywords view of this. And then I want to talk a little bit about the kinds of things that we see here in the facets. So out of the 507 items of bibliographic records in Millikin's environment, 476 of them are books, There are 8 journals that relate to Abraham Lincoln, 13 things related to music, 10 things that relate to visual material. So these are all things that this comes out of the bibliographic fixed field information where we're saying, in the leader and the 008 and so on, what these sorts of things are. But then we also get resource types, so where we get a more granular view of what these things are. And so this is another one of these places and where we're able to see that we have a mix of physical and electronic resources that are making up this particular list. Scrolling down, we're able to see in the facets things in connection with language. So we've got, 507 are English, but it looks like there's a little bit of French, German, and Spanish associated with some of the records as well. And then lastly, where we see the publication year, so 1865 to 2019, and that we're able to see what those values look like. For materials that are physical, we're able to see that we have physical holdings in this particular case. And in fact, if I click on that link, it indicates that this item resides in the Millikin Library. The location is Bookstack. There's the call number that's associated with it. And then that the library owns one copy and that copy is available. So on the shelf and available for users to borrow. So the green dot actually plays a rather important role in all of this, is that it's a visual cue. This item, at least in theory anyway, is available to be borrowed. If we scroll down just a little bit, we were able to see, so item number 4 in the list, here's one that does not have the network icon. And so that means that right now this is a local record. And it's not shared to the network. And this is all part of things that are under discussion in terms of what's going to be the best practice and the expectations, I think, for all of you. Scrolling down just a little bit further, so here we see, this is that item that we were looking at earlier that was suppressed from discovery. You can see that it shows physical. However, that this is a suppressed item, and that we've got a gray dot. And so the gray dot in this case is showing that this item is not in place, or in other words, not available for use. So they're looking at the item number 9. So in this particular case, we have a people silhouette, and the people silhouette indicates that this is an electronic resource linked to the community zone. And we're also able to then see with the electronic information, where does this item, where is this particular electronic book found? And so in this particular case, there are 3 different EBSCOhost collections where that title is available. So again, some more things that are linked to the community, and then other things that are linked to the network. So that's just, when we're looking at an all title search, that's the kind of thing that we see. And so this is at the institution level. Then if we move on to looking at the network, so as I indicated earlier, the network contains the records for all of the institutions. And so it really becomes a place for where we're able to actually look for good content and be monitoring it. And so you can see that the numbers increased measurably from 507 to more than, or almost 25,000 records found in all of the institutions. And so the thing is that at the network there is no inventory. Because the network itself doesn't hold things. It's the institution that has the inventory. But what we can find out here is in this held by statement is which of the institutions actually has a particular title. So this is just really useful information, and I think you can be imagining how you might use this information, making sure that your collection development money is being spent as wisely as possible. So we've got, all of these different sorts of things here. We've got a held by to for that particular item. There's a video recording here where we've got 4 items that hold it, and so on. So that's just, that's kind of interesting stuff. Doesn't really relate so much to how you perform your own data review, but it's good to know that kind of thing is out there. And then lastly, on the community tab, so just a little bit of information about this is that the community tab represents electronic resources that focus on Abraham Lincoln. And so there are in the community zone and the central knowledge base 2,035 electronic resources that focus on Abraham Lincoln. So again, the keywords thing being relevant in this particular case. And so we're able to see here at the community tab then the fact that this is an item that is active in the network, and so it means that some or all of you have access to that particular resource. And then others, like item number 2 in this list, where there is no icon. So this is a resource that is not being used by any of the institutions. So that just about the things in connection with an all title search. Now, to take this down a little bit further, and to focus on physical resources, and this is one that I think a lot of people begin to feel more comfortable with, because we're now able to say, okay, so these are the things on my shelves. So here at Millikin, there are now 462 holdings, and what the 462 represents is the fact that we've got a holdings record that says in the book stacks, we've got this particular item that resides there. And so we're able to see what that looks like. You can see that the information changes a little bit, how we view it. Here's something that's sitting in the oversized collection, and that is something related, looks like something related to a juvenile collection. Again, the library owns one and it's available. One thing to take note of is that when I perform a physical title search and I go to the network, and this is actually kind of dramatic, is that nothing displays, and it's because the network itself does not have any inventory. So we can search bibliographic records, so an all title search at the network, but we cannot search inventory at the network. And the same thing goes for community. Since the community has electronic resources, there's nothing to display. I'm going to switch this up and go to physical items. And the thing to note here is that when we search physical items, that we see very good information about each of the individual items that's available. And you can see that the number here increased to 624. So we had, when I performed the physical title search, it was 462. And when I performed the physical item search, it's 624. Why is that? It has to do with the fact that you might have 2 or more copies of a title attached to a holdings record. It could be that there's a multi-volume set that is attached to a holdings record. And it could be that, especially in fact, if we take a look at the fact that there are these 8 issues, for every single journal issue checked in, there is an item level record. And so we're able to actually see what that particular thing looks like. And so, and you can see where we've got barcodes in some cases on some of these kinds of things. But for every single journal issue, there will be an item level record created. So just removing that particular filter and going back to our 624. So one other thing to take note of here is that with regard to looking at the physical items, so again, we're focusing on inventory at this point, the fact that there's an item on the shelf. That itself is not indicated here that we are related to the network. That's going to happen only if we are performing that all title search. Okay, so there are some things with regard to physical items. The facets change, so they're dynamic depending on the kind of search that you perform. So we're able to see that we have 592 books, 8 issues, 2 music scores, 13 other, and then we've got 9 sound recordings that show up here. And so the kinds of things that you can be doing in terms of data review is, if I perform a search in Voyager and I perform a search here, am I getting the same kinds of numbers? Do they make sense? And if I look at things in connection with suppressed records, do the numbers make sense? And in fact, I'll show you a way that we can actually perform a search for all suppressed records in the system. A little bit here on electronic titles or electronic resources. And so this changes our focus away from physical resources to electronic resources. And in Alma, an electronic resource should never be related to a physical resource at all. That's part of the design, is that there are 2 very separate sorts of resources. So there we see that there are 45 electronic titles. Electronic titles in Alma land tend to be electronic books. And you can see, although we also have, there are some journals, there's some music, they tend to be standalone kinds of things. If we switch this then to electronic portfolios, and one thing to be taking note of is what information displays differently depending on the kind of search that you perform. And so in this case, in electronic portfolio, you can see now that we are very explicitly seeing what is the collection that this item is part of, what other details show the fact, there's portfolio ID, there's a collection ID, a service ID, all of that kind of thing that's available. And another thing to be taking note of is that we have 72 electronic portfolios. And lastly, the electronic collection, which is the largest entity, and there I've just landed up going to the community zone. And how I know that is that there's a people silhouette showing here. We've also landed on the community tab. What I want to be doing is landing on the institution tab, where we're able to see then that there are 10 electronic collections that have things in connection with Abraham Lincoln. So this EBSCOhost master file premier, for example, if you take a look to the right, we're able to see portfolio list 5388. So out of the 5,388 portfolios, some of them have things related to Abraham Lincoln. And then we see, other sorts of numbers. So free e-journals, where we've got 20,682, JSTOR Arts and Sciences portfolio list of 220, and so on. So just different ways to be looking at the information and figuring out what sorts of things you're working on. So what we've been doing thus far is what we like to refer to as simple search. There's also an advanced search where we can construct a Boolean search if we feel so inclined. You also are able to see here where we can decide where we're going to be performing the search: institution, network, or community. So since this is about data review, we're focusing on the institution. Some other things to be trying in terms of data review. You can see here at the top of the list, these are searches that I've been performing I or others working on your implementation. And we've been performing them recently. There's this little clock image that indicates that these are recent things. So it's easy to get back to it. Otherwise, though, of course, we have the ability to scroll down in this area. And here, trying a subject search, so subject LC search. And in this case, I want to go with something on community health. And incidentally, you can be having your favorite searches for things that are representative in your collections. These were terms that I happened to find were very good in this particular case. And so we discover when we perform a search like this, so the subject LC contains keywords community health. And so at this point, we're not enforcing adjacency in any way. We are able to see where we've got, and in fact, if I click on a link for any one of these records, we're able to see the, when we have a look at the information in relation to this, that yes, we do have the terms community health are appearing. They happen to be adjacent in this particular case. One other thing to be taking note of here, as I'm just seeing this 590 field, is that this is what's referred to as a local entry, and so it's viewable only in Millikin's environment. Others would not be able to see this particular entry. I'm going to go back to the results. Try a different type of search, and in fact, the thing that I'm going to do instead is I'm now going to enforce adjacency. So when it was keywords, we had 194. And when we enforce the adjacency to say contains phrase, we've dropped now to 138. And so we're able to then see where, again, you know, and here on the basis of our all titles view, we're actually seeing subject information displaying here quickly and easily. And so all of that kind of information showing up neatly. Then as we get more precise, starts with so we've dropped a few again. And then if we get to the most precise, and that is that the subject equals community health. So we managed to actually filter out completely, because there are no bibliographic records in the Millikin environment where there is a subject heading equal to community health. So this is actually expected behavior in this particular case. So if we then were to add a bibliographic record that would have it, then of course we would be able to see that, that in this list. I'm going to clear the form. One other thing to be on the lookout for is, so again with the all titles, and then has inventory equals no. This particular search is intended to help us identify where we have orphaned bibliographic records. So it means that there's a bibliographic record and nothing else. So if we perform that particular search, and again, this would be something you'll want to be doing to compare with what's going on in Voyager today. And so here we are able to see that at Millikin, there are 182 bibliographic records where there's no inventory. So in some cases, these are, you know, we can see with regard to EBSCOhost that there's no entry in place. With regard to biomagnetic research and technology, we're seeing that there's nothing there. And so whenever I pause over top of the tab for physical or electronic or digital, there's nothing to show. And so another piece that goes along with this, now in fact I just want to see why we have this one here that's showing us something. Okay, so the Alexander Street Press Music Online. So we do have a collection, but it looks like the collection itself doesn't have doesn't have portfolios attached to it. And so when that's the case, again, we're missing the inventory. Now, one other piece that we can add into all of this is, because right now, many of these bibliographic records, or at least some of them anyway, are exposed to discovery. And so you can imagine a patron who comes up to the desk and says, I want to see this book called Inside the Neolithic Mind. Where do I find it? Well, right now we have no indication of what that is. And so one of the things we would want to do in this particular case is identify records that are also not suppressed from discovery. And I'm going to do that by adding in this entry here, tag suppressed title. So tag suppressed title means that we're doing this at the bibliographic level. So now here I've now constructed a Boolean search that says, so we have bib records without any inventory and they are exposed to discovery. So I perform that search and we see that there are 124 such records still showing to users through discovery. And that's the kind of thing I think we want to try and minimize that for patrons, because that becomes a frustration. You know, where is this thing on the shelf? And so one of the things that we could do with this then, and you can see over here at the far right, the ability to save a query, that we can save the query, and when we do that, we create a set that we could then match up to a job that would allow us to suppress all of these records by running that job. So we don't have to go in and edit each one. We'd be able to suppress the entire group. It's a global data change kind of function. So in fact, I'm going to go ahead and just save this query and add in that set so that I can show you a little bit more about that here in just a moment. So we have bib records without inventory and not suppressed. I'm going to make it a public set, and when I make it a public set, it means that anyone else at Millikin will be able to see this set and then also to work with it. So there I have now created that set of records, and we'll talk about a little bit more on that in just a little bit. I'm going to go back to the advanced search. Some other things to be taking note of, and here again, choosing from my primary index, the physical titles. And the kind of thing here is being able to, for example, with the holdings permanent physical location, being able to show, so from Staley Library, for example, what's all in my juvenile collection? And so if we perform that search, then we'll be able to get an idea about, how many titles there are, so more than 5,000. Then, from here we'll be able to just change how we're organizing things, and so you can see that we can go title ascending, title descending, different kinds of things in place, and being able to use that as a way of working with those particular collections. We could also, and here just switching away from that juvenile collection, some of you may also have something along the lines of this online collection. It could be internet, it could be World Wide Web, it could be electronic resources, whatever it might be. The thing that in systems like Voyager and Aleph and III and so on and so forth, there was not a good way to handle electronic resources, so we would create a virtual physical location so we could group together those electronic resources. In Alma, we don't need that. And so we're able to be able to identify these things that are still in this sort of physical virtual location called online, and we're able to identify where we have, at least at Millikin anyway, 82 such things that need to actually be converted to become electronic. And so these will be things that you will want to be looking at and identifying as resources that should be converted to become electronic. And that's part of the P2E file that you'll be working with as part of making sure that that information can then actually be converted during the cutover load. Okay. Yes. Just one more search that I did want to perform, and that is I'm going to go back over to the all title search, and it's here in this secondary entry. As I was already using it, is the tag suppressed title. If I just want to identify anything at all that is suppressed, whether or not it has inventory. And so we're able to see that there's actually quite a, okay, the tag suppressed equals no, and then we have also the tag suppressed equals yes. So this would be another one of these things that you'll want to compare with what you have in Voyager. So here at Millikin, 70,372 bib records that are suppressed from discovery for reasons that you know, some of which probably relates to purchase order lines, purchase orders in Voyager and so on, where you were not able to sever the connection. That kind of thing, again, works differently in Voyager or in Alma than it does in Voyager. So there will be opportunity for this kind of thing to be cleaned up post go live. So you know, next year at this time, you might be working on some of those sorts of things. Okay, now before we do any other kinds of things, Ben, are there any questions that I might address?
Yeah, before we jump into analytics, I did want to say that some of those standalone or bibliographic records that we expect might have been changed to standalone portfolios in the online or electronic locations. That was probably because CARLI reached out to folks in early June and July to get their to help them start building their PDE file. So we're going to be doing that much closer to the time that we stop adding new information to Voyager. So there should be much less of a gap than what we're seeing in the with the production load at Go Live. So. But it is a thing to take a look at now. But just one thing I wanted to point out there. But we just had a couple audio questions, no substantive questions really on the content. So I think we can move on to the next section.
Very good. Thank you, Ben. Okay, I did want to, before we actually get on to looking at things in connection with analytics, just a couple of other things to be looking at. Some things here in connection with acquisitions activities. So, for example, to identify whether or not under the acquisitions menu purchase order lines, are there any things in review? Now, in order to actually have some things in review here, I created these. I made them for the purposes of illustration so that you can see where we have purchase order lines in review. And what this usually means is that there's mandatory information missing. And you can see from the alerts, at least one of the, a record has at least one of the reporting codes is missing. We've got a brief bibliographic record. Mandatory information is missing or erroneous. And so we're able to see that. So if any of you are seeing things here in this purchase order lines in review, it's the kind of thing there, again, that we wanted to try and minimize how many of these things come through with these alerts, and particularly for the larger institutions where we probably will have some of those kinds of things in place. So that's purchase order lines. That the equivalent in Voyager is a line item that goes onto a purchase order. So in Alma, we begin with a purchase order line that then gets added to a purchase order. And so we have also under the acquisitions purchase order, There may be purchase orders in review that you may be seeing. Not seeing them here. There are other things that we might be looking at. For example, under the purchase order area, approve, and this particular function will be present if invoicing approval rules, in this case, or purchasing approval rules, would be set to say, okay, something needs to stop here and be approved by a purchasing manager or an invoicing manager. So that's configuration in Alma if that's something that you want to be doing. It could be something that you're going to be seeing here while you are reviewing data. One other thing here in connection with acquisitions is vendor records. Something that I think you may have heard already is that vendor records do not migrate a second time. So that means if you have added any vendors to Voyager since the extract of the data occurred a while back, they will also need to be added to Alma. And so that is something to be on the lookout for. You can see here if I take a look at any one of these, and that all of these vendors will migrate as a material supplier and that we can be looking at these, getting them updated, perhaps saying, okay, we know that this is a vendor that doesn't exist any longer, that they went out of business or whatever it is. At that point, we would have the ability to make them inactive. And so when we make them inactive, it just basically takes them out of the line that would allow us to then choose them when we go to create a purchase order line. And I just see a question from Amy, is the reverse true for vendors? If we create vendors in the test load, will they carry over into production? Yes, they will carry over into production. And so we can, just see the different kinds of things that are possible here. As I said, you may want to be going through and updating some of these vendor records. Here at Millikin, there are 563 vendors. Based on what I know about acquisitions going on at universities and colleges around the world, my estimation is that far fewer vendors are being used on the whole today, and that we probably would land up with, maybe 100 that truly are active. So we can go through and just review, perhaps be updating, making sure that all of the information is just as good as it can possibly be. So that was one thing to be looking at in connection with acquisitions activities. I did want to talk a little bit about some fulfillment things here, and really being able to monitor things, like, for example, when a request has been made for something. And here again, I've actually set up a few examples in order to just have something to show, and that I had some items that had patrons request that were on the shelf in the library. And so there are some of these examples that we would be able to see. So some of this, in addition to data review, is looking at just the process. So, really what sorts of things might be coming through. So that was the pick from shelf function. Then there's so pick from shelf means something's been requested, but it's not yet on the active hold shelf, which we're able to see here then that these things are on the active hold shelf, and so waiting for a patron to come and collect them. And then there's also the expired hold shelf, meaning that these are, so we're actually not seeing anything here on the reshelve area. What we do see, though, is that there is something on the Activate Next tab. And whenever we see something on the Activate Next, it means that we've got this item that was requested by one patron. It's on the hold shelf for them, but that a second patron has requested a particular item, and that since on the active hold shelf, that patron has not come to collect that item, And basically, the time has passed. We're now going to go ahead and activate next for the next requester. So somebody else who wants to get hold of that item. And it's, the goal is just to keep things moving, that we don't allow something to sit on the hold shelf forever, and that we actually come through and monitor some of those sorts of things. One other piece here in connection with fulfillment is in the advanced tools area, and this is something that I did show at the workshops that I delivered a couple of weeks ago, and I'm sure that Ben did earlier this week. Is this fulfillment configuration utility? This is something that we can use to identify. Did things migrate well? Did things migrate the way that we expect them to? And have we got our fulfillment units and terms of use correctly identified? And so here, for example, if I choose Cynthia Fuller, who is a faculty member and works in the library at Millikin, and enter a barcode, and so here, just getting hold of one barcode, there you can see this title that's called Final Innings. And so Cynthia is a faculty member. Then this, as part of data review, tells us that this is the fulfillment unit that applies the relationship between Cynthia as a member of the faculty user group and this physical item. So, and then we're able to actually see, as part of all of this, what are the exact rules that apply to this particular combination of a faculty user and a particular book. If I try for a different type of user, and in this particular case, I'm just going to choose my little friend Heidi, and I want to go ahead and perform that search. So as an undergrad with the same title, being able to see that we have a different set of rules that apply, and that where we're able to see these kinds of things. This is an area that I urge everybody who works in circulation to be involved in, because on your go live day, we want this to work as neatly and cleanly as possible. And so be checking different kinds of things that you loan. Have a representative user from each of the user groups, and just make your way through and make sure that what you see here in the terms of use details makes sense to you. And then if you discover that there's something that doesn't make sense, then you can request Ben and the team to help you with making adjustments to the terms of use, or for that matter, the CARLI team as well. So there's a lot there for you to be able to see and work with it. There's also in this fulfillment area the ability to create a fulfillment set. And this is a really excellent functionality that is available for circulation desks, where we would be able to say, for example, show me any of the items that have the status of lost. Normal in this case means these are the things that are currently on loan. You can see recalled, renewed, lost. So let's just see what we get here if we look at lost items, and I'm going to add in today's date. I'm going to save that. And then I'm going to go and view my set. And so there's the set that I created earlier from my search that I had performed, and in this case using the fulfillment entry, the fulfillment set functionality, and we're able to see then what are all of the items that are lost or that have that designation of lost. And if I was to click on this link, that would then tell us who was the borrower who lost that particular item. You can see that there's a due date for this item that's now more than a year ago. we're also able to see that these items are not suppressed from discovery. And so that might be a function that we want to go through and actually perform for these particular items. And so, again, being able to look at those kinds of things. So I'm just going to say that I'm done looking at that particular set. What we were looking at there was an itemized set, whereas we also have this logical set that is available for us to look at, and we're able to see all of those results, those bibs without inventory and not suppressed. I'm not going to go into too much more detail about sets at this point, but it is something that you'll want to be taking into account as you're reviewing data, comparing, for example, this particular group, bib records without inventory in Alma and bib records that are solo in Voyager today. And so making sure that you can then be updating in one place or another. And if you do it in Voyager today, then it would migrate that way at the cutover load. If you don't want to do it in Voyager, then you'd be able to do this later in Alma. So after go live, you'd be able to go through and take care of these particular bibliographic records. And I say it in that particular way is that because when the cutover period arrives, there will be a new extract taken from your current Voyager environment. And so that's going to be updated according to whatever you've done since the last extract was taken. And then all of that will then become what is your new Alma. So everything that is in Alma today, with the exception of vendor records and configuration, everything else gets wiped out. And so basically the entire environment is cleared, and then a new migration occurs. And so that's where we need to make sure that you are in a good spot for those sorts of things. Okay, so they're showing you some things that I think it's absolutely worthwhile to be looking at, monitoring, identifying as, oh, this is something we should do in Voyager before the cutover load, or it's something that we're going to wait until later, but making note of it at this particular point. Okay, so there we've basically been performing some searches. We've been looking at a variety of things. I also want to spend a little time talking about things in connection with Alma Analytics. And so the things in connection with analytics is that there are roles that relate to being able to actually see the analytics function appearing in the menu, and the kinds of things that we're able to do. And so some basics, some infrastructure kinds of things, just to be taking note of here. There is a gray bar here at the bottom of the menu where it says data available as of, data updated as of. So taking the data updated as of statement first. What this means is that there was an extract of data that kicked off last evening at 6 p.m. Central Time. And so that data then is extracted. It goes through a transformation process, and then it gets loaded to analytics. And then you can see here with and let me just open the menu again, the data available as of statement. So at 2100 hours, 41 minutes, and 51 seconds, the load to analytics concluded. And so we would know now that we're looking at the most current information that's available to us. So that's a little bit different than what you have in Voyager, in that there is a delay in terms of when you're going to be able to report on certain things. So I'm going to go into the analytics area, and I wanted to show you a couple of things that I think are going to be helpful here in terms of being able to report. And so in order to get here, I have the design analytics role. And so if you don't have it, it is one that you'll want to make sure that you do get. all of the analyses that I'm going to show you are things that come out of the box group analyses. And so we're able to find them in the catalog. When first arriving in analytics, it's common to appear that we arrive here. So we have this My Folder space. This is private workspace on the basis of the operator that's logged in. So, and we're able to see over here at the upper right-hand corner, signed in as, and so if any of you have come to this particular spot, you should see your primary identifier appearing there. Where we're going to go is the shared folders area and into the Alma folder. This is where the out-of-the-box analyses reside. So one thing that I'm just going to assume in all of this is that the examples I'm going to show indicate that data is migrating for all functional areas, including acquisitions. And so in the acquisitions area, I want to start with a report. And the example I want to look at here is one that's called expenditure per classifications. And so I'm going to go ahead and edit that. And in editing it, basically it opens the analysis. And what this shows us over the years, and so this is for all of the years for which there is data that got migrated, is that we have, so from 2004 to the 2020 fiscal year, that we have this bit of information. So this is giving us the sort of the big picture details. If I click on the little arrow to the left of classifications total, it's going to actually open up the LC classifications area and give me a chance to see sort of how did we spend our money. And so and we're seeing in this particular case rounded dollar values, because that's the default setting in the Oracle Business Intelligence environment. And so that gives us a chance to see sort of how things have evolved over the years. Now, the more important thing that I wanted to identify for you is on the Criteria tab. So the Criteria tab is sort of the behind-the-scenes kinds of things. Very first, the three types of data that we've got available. The very first one in here, I'm going to increase the font size a lot just to make the image very clear. So the image next to the word expenditure, this is what represents what we call a measure. So it's counting things. In this case, dollar values. And so it's the meaning that we not only did we order and receive something, but we paid for it. And so we have an expenditure measure in place. Then we have our transaction date fiscal year. This is an attribute. And the attribute in this particular case, the attribute is stable data. So in this case, the fiscal year, we purchased something in the fiscal year 2018. So that's, that's not going to change. But it could also be things like author, title, ISBN, publisher, and so on. So we've got a lot of those kinds of things that are stable data. And then the third one here is the hierarchy. And the hierarchy gives us a chance actually to see the fact that we've got then, that we have our classifications at the top, and then we have the sub-classifications that come through. And that's what we were seeing when I was, as I was beginning to open that kind of thing up. Some other things to take note of in this particular example is the filters. Transaction amount is greater than 1, and the 1 here means greater than $1. So if you migrated purchase order lines for journal subscriptions, for example, and they had a $0 value, they will show as they may not actually be counted in this particular case because the filter says it's got to be greater than $1. The fiscal period description is prompted, so that means show data for all the years for which that's available. We have a filter that says expenditure, library name is prompted, and that we're using the grouping for the classifications is to go as far as 20 characters. So one thing I might do in this particular case is just make a small change and edit the fiscal period just so that I can see, what do I have? So is equal to is in, and then from here choose my fiscal year. So FY 2020. And you'll see very quickly, and here I'll just take this down a little bit, that we've then stripped out everything except for the fiscal year 2020. And then from here, being able to open up, okay, it's opening up, retrieving information, and they're seeing where we have different kinds of subclassifications, and so they're American literature, then 1900 and 1960, and so on and so forth. So again, these are things you can do to compare with what you've been doing in Voyager up to this point. It won't be completely, there won't be a complete match because of course you've continued to work in Voyager since that extract was taken. Okay, let's see, one other thing here, and so I'm going to walk away from this particular analysis because I just want to leave it be as it is. Another one to be looking at in the acquisition area is going to be detailed expenditures, because this actually shows more information on these kind of things, and we'd again be able to be comparing just to make sure that we've got, do these things match up with what we have in Voyager. From Lori, data and analytics is read-only. That is correct. If you put something, or in other words, we are able to retrieve information, we're not able to put it back. And so here, seeing that with this particular fund and this reporting fund, these titles were purchased. There's the vendor information, the line item price, and all of those kinds of details. So one thing I might do in this case is just for the purposes of comparison and for data review would be more along the lines of just saying, so there's my fiscal period description. I would want to be looking at 2019 only, or sorry, the 2020 year, so that again, so is equal to is in, and from the drop-down list, so that we are then able to see so these are the things then that relate to 2019, pardon me, 2020 fiscal year. So the things that have happened since the current fiscal year got underway. So again, looking at this, so everybody's going to get a part here in looking at this kind of information. I want to take a look at, and again, now if you make adjustments to any of these kinds of things as I've just done, something just to be taking note of here is if I try to save the analysis, so I made that adjustment to the fiscal year, you can see that this error message appears. Access denied for user to pass. That's because these are all things in the out-of-the-box group of analyses. Anything that's part of that out-of-the-box group, every Alma library has them, and the only people who can actually edit them are business analysts at Ex Libris. So you and I can't save anything into that folder. What we would land up doing is using the Save As, and from there saying, going to the institution level, putting it into reports, and so here I'm going to say detailed expenditures FY 2020. And so then that now becomes something that can be managed locally and be able to have, get better and other information going with it. Back to the catalog, and moving on from the acquisitions part of things, now to talk a little bit about stuff in connection with electronic inventory. And this is an example that I like to use because it gives us an opportunity to see what's the number of electronic resources we have. And so in this particular case, so electronic inventory count and then as the results displayed, the question that you want to ask yourself is, do the numbers make sense? So for example, at Millikin, we're showing that there are 190,134 portfolios with a material type of book, 74 for computer file, 104,399 for electronic journals, and so on. So there are all of these different kinds of things. If you discover that something seems like an outlier or it doesn't quite make sense to you, like let's say, for example, you're thinking, okay, this mixed material thing doesn't make sense to me. We have a way to be able to go in and modify that. And so I'm going to actually go back over to the criteria tab. And you'll see here as we look at this material type is prompted. And so, and you've heard me say it now a couple of times, whenever we have this is prompted, show me all of the categories or all of the material types for which there is data, which is why we had book and journal and computer file and so on. And now I want to actually apply a different type of view. And again, this is the is equal to is in. And in this case, I want to check the mixed material. So that's just going to give us a smaller grouping to look at. When we go to take a look at the results, then we can add in a little bit more information. And we could have added that information in from other areas as well. But where I want to go now is to actually get down to the bibliographic details, and I'll be able to say, in this particular case, show me what this is. And in fact, and you can see there where I get a vertical blue bar. It's kind of a pale blue. I'm going to drop that column of data there. And now it shows me what these things are. So mixed material, Heal collection, and then also the Massachusetts local tax list through 1776. So from here, we'd be able to, and there I've selected the cell, using Control-C to copy, then going over to Alma and taking a look for this particular entry. And so there we find that particular title. Okay, it actually tells us that it's microform. So it could be that we've got, some things going on there with that, with the settings for particular fixed field information for these resources that aren't exactly what they should be. And so it would be a way for that kind of information to get updated. It helps to identify where those things are. So we could be doing this with any of the other material types. So, the computer files, there were 76 or 74 of them or something like that. And just say, again, do they make sense? And being able to work with them in that way. So I'm going to use again the Save As. And I'm going to again put this to the Millikin folder. And we'll say that it's electronic inventory where material type is mixed material. And then just including title. You can see that I tend to go with verbose names for my analyses. What is really important here is that you can tell at a glance. You know, it's not enough to say that this is Amy's report. It's just not very helpful to others whom we might share this with. So some things there in connection with the electronic resources. So first and foremost, do the numbers make sense to you? Because if they're either very high or very low, then that's something that needs to be questioned, and you'll want to be making sure that we get that we're able to figure out what exactly was going on with them. Okay, back over to the catalog, and this time to something in connection with fulfillment. So again, back to the out-of-the-box group, and we have our fulfillment reports area. And here, again, looking at some things here for the count of items loaned. Now, this analysis, I happen to think, is not named very well because it shows us information on items that were loaned many years ago, perhaps many years ago, and have not been returned to the library. And so it gives us a way to be able to identify those things. So again, do the numbers make sense? So if you were to take a look at 2013 and for things that come out of the archives, the fact that there are 3 things on loan, does that particular thing make sense? Now we can also see that there's an item in 2011 from reserves that says that this is still on loan. So we will want to be checking on that. And we can see something from 2015, music LPs, and that there are 3 things out of the book stacks in 2016. Okay, so let's have a look at what these things are. The very first thing I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to just move this library name column to the leftmost position. And so just to show you how I'm doing that, when I place my cursor over top of the column, there's a little header that appears, and you can see it there. And when I place my cursor right over that header, I get a 4-headed arrow, and at that point, I can pick up the column and move it, and then I get a vertical blue bar, and then I can drop the column there. And so just, and this is, to me, this is just helpful in terms of organizing what we're looking at. So make that particular change. Then I'm going to go back over to the Criteria tab. And what I want to do here is I want to modify a filter. And I'm going to, again, there's our loan year is prompted. So show me all of the information, all the years for which there's data. And so I'm going to modify this. And in this example, we're going to use is between. So we know that we had 2011 and 2016. The is between in this particular case is inclusive. So we'll get the 2016 information showing. And so now that I've made that change, we'll see a smaller list of data. The in-house loan indicator is equal to is in N. So in-house loan, that would be a browse use. So if this was set to be in-house loan indicator is equal to is in Y, that would mean it would be browse. So if it's an N, it means that these are true loans. They've actually gone to a user. And we'll take a look at the results for our change now. So we've got now our group of 5 things that got loaned many years ago, and now we want to try and figure out what are these things, and then of course, who was the borrower? And so I'm going to start off with going to bibliographic details because getting the title is going to be very useful. So I'm going to add that in. So what I'm doing here is something that I would propose to you that you would want to be reviewing in Voyager and saying, okay, these are all things that we clearly are not going to get back. Let's go ahead and clean them up in Voyager. So it's a way to be able to work with that. So there, we're getting our title information. I'm going to go up to, and I'll just go ahead and close that. On the loan details, I am going to add in, and again, just adding in the column, the call number and the barcode. Because, you know, one of the things that this will now allow me to do is I'll be able to export this, go to the stacks, one more time, check. Did this actually get back into the collections and do that sort of thing? So we've now got much more information. I'm going to do a save as, and so let's just get this saved to the institution folder again. So items loaned from 2011 to 2016 and not returned. Similar to Voyager access queries, save early and save often. It can save you a lot of discomfort if you happen to get a network dropout or whatever else might be the case. Now, our remaining parts of things here would be to then include from the borrower details area. And here I'm going to include primary identifier. You could also be including first and last name, which you can certainly do at your institutions, but I will not do for the purposes of illustration here. So I'm just going to drop that information in here. So now we're seeing, we'd be able to actually go and look at patron records to say, okay, yes, these items are still on loan. And the last thing that I want to then be including is the due date. And so there, I'm going to choose the due date, and I'll put that over here. And we'll be able to then see if we have a current due date. So here we can see, so there, the real vocal book. Yeah, so that item had a due date in 2011, and apparently whoever is the user did not return the item. We can see that we have 2016. So again, unlikely to be returned, 2016, 2017. Well, here for the music LP, we have a due date in 2019. So it appears that this user, ID 12, has been faithfully renewing that particular item. And so that's okay, you know, if they're doing that kind of thing. So what we're looking for, though, is the things where it's clearly due well in the past. And then being able to use this sort of as a next step to, are we going to go ahead and withdraw these records? Will we do it in Voyager before we get to cut overload and a few other things like that? Okay. Questions? Ben, if there are any, please interrupt me.
There was one question about what historical data you'll see in Voyager. And since you have this example here with primary identifier, I just want to kind of note that the only reason we are seeing a specific user with these loans is because the item is still checked out. For things that had been on loan and returned some time ago, I know CARLI does anonymize their data, and that would be expected in Alma, even if CARLI hadn't anonymized their historical loans. So you will expect to see counts of things that have been loaned over time, but not specific transactions.
Right.
So there's a couple questions here. I'll start reading. For those of you that are sending them to me privately, that's fine. But you can also send them to all guests or all panelists. But the most recent question was, will it be possible to query analytics using Excel or Access, similar to how we can use Access as a front end for Voyager now?
You won't be able to do it with Access. and it's because this is it's a different environment altogether, and it's in the cloud, and so we won't have that same kind of access. We can, though, for example, export this information. And so you can see here there's this item that's got a blue up arrow on it. This would allow me to now export this information to Excel so that I would be able to then, for example, take this list to the stacks and then be able to look at this and work with it, you know, and just to the stacks. Or do these items exist? Do they match the barcode? And so on and so forth. So then there is another question. Is the total number of circulation coming over from Voyager included in the analytics? Ben, where is that information migrating to?
You should see it in analytics and Alma. So I believe total loans for items over time would appear in the More Information tab of the repository search or on the physical item.
Right.
And then also you could query that in analytics.
Okay. All right, so let's have a look at two other things before we finish up this session for today. And here again, I'm going to go over to, and I'll just go ahead and save that one more time to make sure that that change does get made. Now, just one other piece that to add to what Ben was talking about there in connection with anonymized data. So he's absolutely right. You'll be able to see how often an item has been borrowed over time. And then we'll also be able to see how many items have been borrowed by a patron. We just won't be able to see what they were. So, you know, Ben borrowed 14 things in the course of 2019, but we won't know what they are, and we'll be able to see that Book A was borrowed 150 times over the course of 2019, but we won't know who the borrowers are. So that's that whole anonymization thing that's going on. So some other things here that relate very specifically to physical inventory in the institutions, and that's under the inventory area. And so some examples to take a look at in this particular case. I want to go to the item count by library and location. And I imagine that if you're in a larger institution that this may take a few minutes to run, but here we're able to see at Staley Library at Millikin, in the archives, there are 473 items. In the book stacks, 155,000 and some, and so on and so forth. Here we're seeing five physical things that are showing up in the online location. And so that goes back to that thing that we looked at earlier during the repository search to see what those sorts of things are. So again, these would be things that we would then be able to go through and actually make a change, modify things. I did notice, yes, there is this review location, and I'm guessing that this review location, just based on my preparation for this session, is we're thinking about whether or not we want to retain these items or if there's something else that needs to be done with them. So in order to get a list of all of these things, so again, on the criteria tab, we're going to modify the filter for location name. So going from is prompted to is equal to is in. And let's go to that review location. Of course, we could just as easily go with the online location. The review one was kind of interesting to me. And then having a look at what these things are. And so being able to add from the bibliographic details things like the title. And so getting that in place, let's drop it there. There is, you can see here, suppressed from discovery. We'd be able to include that and indicate what that part of things means. And so yes or no, and we're actually able to see in this list that there are some no's, lots of yeses, that these are suppressed, but not all of them. So there, for example, a pronouncing dictionary of American English is in this review location and still exposed to discovery. Then getting hold of other things like the permanent call number, which we find in the holdings record. Okay, a barcode if that would be useful information, and so on. And so if we wanted to at this point, we could just say, show me all of these things that are not suppressed from discovery, so that I can then be using that as a way to identify things that need to be suppressed, or perhaps making other decisions about what's going to happen with these things. Are we actually going to withdraw them? Are we going to replace? What are we going to be doing with these particular resources? So I'm going to go ahead and just, again, with the save as. So we have our location equals review with title. And one more example to take a look at. And so again, going back over to the catalog. And again, this one for the inventory. And this one is similar to what we had earlier with the electronic inventory count. There is a physical inventory count. And so this is going to show us these things that say, okay, the library owns 169,284 volumes. And there's our 5 mixed material and so on and so forth. A question from Blake. You could also save any of these reports in the My Folder location. Yes, you can save things there. If you do, it means that only you as the operator can see and work with them. And there will be a time and a place for all of that kind of thing as you're working on creating an analysis and you're just not ready for the rest of the world to see it yet. The rest of the world meaning people at your institution, not larger than that.
I think he also means pulling down an example report, so finding one from the catalog and localizing it to their institution. I think that's how I interpreted it.
Okay. Yeah, okay. So in fact, just in terms of doing that, I'll go ahead and use the save as. And so what I've been doing here with the shared folders and the Millikin report is that we're saving that to, and it just means that these reports then are exposed to anybody at Millikin who has the design analytics role. But the My Folders area means that then I can go ahead and now I can get to work on it, and only when I'm ready to share it with others at the institution, then do I actually add it to the institution folder. So an example of some things here, with regard to this physical inventory type, we could be going through, and again, do the numbers make sense? That's the very first question to be asking here is, do the numbers make sense? But then also being able to see things such as where we have a mismatch between what a bib record says it is and what the item level record says it is. And so the thing that I want to do in this particular case is and we're able to in fact see back here at the Criteria tab, from bibliographic details, so there is our material type is prompted, and that this is coming from the bibliographic details folder. So we know that that's where that is focusing. The physical item details also includes a material type entry. And this is where we sometimes can see that mismatch between things or among things. So if we go and take a look at this information now, seeing where perhaps we need to be making some adjustments in the data. So starting off with the fact that, number of items, we've got all of these book things, but then we've got some things that have been classified as a music score. We've got none, we've got other sound recordings, and so on and so forth. So what that seems to suggest is that there's some inconsistency between what a bibliographic record says something is and what the material type is. So this would be, again, the kind of thing where I would focus on, just take it bit by bit, be methodical about it, and try and identify. So where we have bibs, where the item material type says it's music score, what should it be? And being able to adjust that kind of thing. Something else, though, to be taking note of or several other things in this example, you can see now that I have a scroll bar over here at the far right and a scroll bar here in the middle. Personally, I find that frustrating, so there is a way for me to change that. So we have just the outer scroll bar, and I'm going to do that by going to this View Properties button. And I'm going to change the fixed headers with scrolling content to content paging. Click on OK, and then you'll see that we have just the outer scroll bar. That kind of thing can be, that can really just save a whole lot of frustration. So I'm going to go ahead and, so now that I had saved that analysis to my folder, it's saved there. Then if I want to go further with this, then I would be able to say, under the heading of a journal here, there are 18 classified as book. Or the music kinds of things where we have, again, the variation on what the various kinds of things are known as. So let's just go back over to the Criteria tab, and I want to change the bibliographic material type. Now, actually, one thing just to make this a little bit easier to identify, and this I think you'll find just as helpful overall. So I've opened up the menu for material type, and I'm just going to go to the column properties so that I can say on the column format tab, by customizing the heading, that this is the bib material type. And then I'll do the same thing for the item material type, just to make it clear what this is. And then I want to take this bib material type and modify it so that we're looking at, so is equal to is in. And let's have a look at the music one, for example. And then we'll take a look at, again, another filter. So adding in another filter in this particular case. So we'll say that we've got book. Then taking a look at the results and going from there to be able to identify what these things are. And so you can see how now looking at the results, it's much clearer what belongs to where. And then from the bibliographic details, being able to add in things like title and perhaps MMS ID. So let's get title in. Okay, so there we're seeing some things that can be helpful there if we wanted to include MMS ID. And so MMS ID is basically like bib ID in Voyager. And so we'd be able to go in and actually take a look at this information in Alma. So there you get selecting or clicking in the cell to select it, Control-C to copy it, and then through here dropping that MMS ID into place, getting to the very specific record, and so being able to see what this one says to us, and then from here getting to the item level record and editing the item and seeing that it very clearly says book, whereas, and so this is the kind of thing that can just really help you with being able to be as consistent as possible with regard to any of these items. I won't make any changes there, but it gives you an idea about how you might work on those sorts of things. So again, one last thing to just be doing here, again, we could be exporting this information, and you can see the different ways that you can export. Lots of opportunities. We can be printing, getting a printable PDF or HTML version of things. So there are ways to be able to share this information. Lastly, with regard to any of these kinds of things, just be methodical about it. I did also want to go back over to the catalog now, and so there from the My Folders area, one thing I can do with this now is I can, from the More menu, I can copy this, and then I'll just use the paste function. There we go. There's the paste function there. And then I've now got a copy also in the institution folder where anyone at Millikin who has the design analytics role will be able to see and work with it. Last questions before we wrap up, Ben?
No questions in the chat. One thing I was hoping we would show is just how to create a new report rather than picking a pre-made one from the catalog.
Sure, we can
but
do that.
No new questions in the chat other than just will there be more detailed training on analytics in the future, which there certainly will be. But yeah. Okay.
All right, so let's go through the process of creating a new analysis, and one, in this case, for in connection with users. So I'm going to begin by creating a new analysis, and what I want to get in this analysis is a count of users by group, so that we have an idea. Does it make sense what we're seeing? So you can see all of these different subject areas that are present, and one of the area we're going to go to is this users subject area. So what this is going to bring to us is a blank canvas. We basically get to start with a new analysis here. And so from the user details area, where we're going to be able to see that we have, and in fact I'm going to start off with the user group entry. So here I can either drag and drop into the selected column space or double click. One or the other will work. Now I'll go ahead and save this. So if I go to take a look at the results right now, and the user ID in this case is an Oracle ID. And so this would be like a patron ID in Voyager rather than a barcode or something like that. So and you can see that we get really long numbers. And actually this is one thing to be taking note of here, is that this, in the Millikin environment, the last 4 digits on the number, 5864, that is the thing that says this data belongs to Millikin. 5864 is Millikin's slot in the Alma universe. Others of you will have 5863 and 5867 and so on and so forth. That's a way in which to identify those things. Now, as I said, what we're looking for is a count of users by group, not a list of user IDs, because that's just not terribly interesting. And so I'm going to go back over to the Criteria tab and perform a slightly technical entry here on the user ID column. So as we discussed earlier, we've got attributes here. And what I want to do is I want to change this attribute to become a measure. So I'm going to do that by going to the Edit Formula area, and I'm going to insert a function that's going to change all of those values into counts. And you can see, you'll see here what happens as a result of this. So now if you just knew to put in count and the parentheses around, by all means. If not, we go through the approach I just did there, and I'm going to go ahead and click on OK, and you'll see that it changed from being an attribute to be a measure. And so now if I go to take a look at the results, we get a nice tidy table, and then I've landed on use the save as rather than the saved. And then we get a nice tidy table that then says we've got this, this number of users by user group in this environment. There is a group of 17 where we don't have any user group in place. And so that's the kind of thing that potentially will affect the ability to provide circulation services to a particular user. Could be that we wouldn't be able to lend anything to those users. So that will be something to be having a look at. Okay, so there are some questions that have come through. Let's see here. In terms of historical data that migrates, to the create date of bibliographic records in Voyager migrate to Alma? Let's have a quick look at one of these. Let's see what kind of date we have. What's the date of publication on this particular item? Okay, so 1938. So we know that that's an older item. If I go into edit this, so I'll just be curious to see what date does apply in that particular case. So we know it's an older item. Now we are actually getting a create date. So that's the date that it migrated into the test load at this particular point.
That's right, Connie. That would be expected. Alma is creating a new record for all the things that come in. You can also see this from the all titles search, I believe.
Right.
Right. Under date modified for any edits, and then date created. But the Voyager create dates are not retained. The migration date is what you should expect to see, but that is something that Alma tracks.
Right, and then Ted has just reminded us that the bib record shows in the 005 the date that the record was last edited before migration. So we'll be able to see that. But we won't be able to necessarily see the exact date that it got added to Voyager. Depending on.
I didn't see any other questions, but the 005, thank you, Ted, for pointing that out. That's actually something that came up with Connie a week or two ago with Svetlana, I think. So that would be another approach, but the Alma stored date would be based on the migration. But if you click on the analytics dropdown, Connie, we did create something for CARLI folks. No, actually, back on Alma, just the analytics dropdown menu.
Oh, pardon me. Yes.
Yep.
The test loads
under
report.
reports, the test loads report. So some of your basic information, we did create this, and it was a tool we used to check your data too. If you click on that, it should open the new report. So you were working on a user group report momentarily ago, so we did create one like that. And for this count of physical items, one nice feature is there if you are seeing things where, hey, we don't expect to find things in the online or archives or acquisitions department, clicking on the location name will actually drop you down in there. So if we clicked on acquisitions department, we would see
Three things, right? Sorry, I
specific
clicked on.
identifiers.
Yeah,
No
I clicked
worries.
on online.
But I do want to just encourage folks to, the catalog of existing reports is very useful, but we do have this sort of guided report for you to look at things, and then you obviously have the ability to make new reports on your own. So it's read only, so you can, test, as vigorously as you want. There's nothing you can really do to disrupt the database here.
Right. Ben, Amy is making a comment that they're getting an error message when they try to run that report, so may need to just check on whether or not there's something that has gone awry there with linkage or other.
I'm taking a note for Juliet. Those were created. It could just be a human error, so it sounds like that might be the case with Juliet. So there might be a handful more of those, but we did check this, so almost all of you should have this working. But I will double check with Juliet.
Okay. Dennis has asked the question, can historical circulation counts be identified for a specific patron with all item level identifying info being scrubbed?
I think the historical information is on whether or not the items circulated. I'm not sure if any aggregate information on patrons is preserved, but we can check into that. I'm fairly sure it is on the collection, not what level of usage the patrons had used.
Right.
We can check. And who asked that?
That was Dennis Krieb.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Why don't we wrap it there? And then if you discover that you have any other questions that you'd like some help with in terms of things in connection with analytics, please don't hesitate to make contact. Ben and his team are certainly able to provide assistance, and I can help. And be able to work with those sorts of things. Blake has just dropped in one more question. I'd be interested to know if there is a historical count stored for the patron records. Blake, do you mean how many items a patron has borrowed ever over time, or is there some other information that you'd be looking at?
Okay.
Okay,
Yep,
got
we
it.
will follow up with you as well, Blake. Thanks everyone for your attention today, and we will be using this throughout the project. So, thanks again, Connie.
All right. Bye for now, everyone.